Hi, welcome to another episode of Humanism Today, the podcast where we dive into ideas, stories, and conversations that inspire humanists, freethinkers, and like-minded people. This podcast is presented by the Humanists and Freethinkers of Fairfield County in Connecticut. Our motto is compassion and reason. Compassion means that we care about all people and their rights regardless of their status in society or their personal condition. Reason means that we use science, facts, logic, and scientific methods to find the truth.
It's a real pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, a featured speaker, Dave Shafer. I've known Dave for about 10 years or more. He's been a member of the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism. Quite a few of you are members of for many years. I'm glad to see so many of you that come to support Dave. While Dave has spent his entire career on high-tech optics projects, the thing that I admire most about Dave is his wide range of interests. I recently took a couple walks with Dave, and it's something when you're walking with Dave, amazing things pop out of his head. While we were chatting, he would say things like, I was working on a project with Salvador Dali. Like, don't we all? Or one of my telescopes was sent to Saturn. Like, I sent a postcard to California. The extraordinary seems very normal to Dave. I've been present, and a lot of you have been present in classes in a wide variety of interests, including opera, art, technology, literature, history. So it's fitting that the subject of his talk should be about his life and his career. Please welcome Dave Shafer.
I've seen a lot of faces. It's nice to see people I haven't seen recently. As George said, my field is optics, my main field. And most speakers, public speakers, they try to start out with a joke. There's almost no jokes about optics. But the average person has had some exposure to optics in the form of photography, because it has lenses in it. So there is a joke about photography. A new mother is pushing a stroller down the street with her baby in it. Very proud mother, beaming with pride. And a passerby happens to walk by and looks in and says, oh, what a beautiful child. And the mother says, that's nothing. You should see the pictures. So I enjoy public speaking, and sometimes I speak to small groups like these here. And sometimes larger groups. So I got involved very early with optics. My professional career has been 60 years, but right after birth I got involved because my parents told me that if I cried a lot, they found if they put me underneath a bare light bulb, I would stop crying because I became transfixed with this bright light. And ever since, when I go outside, I look at the sun. I like overhead lights inside. I got a thing about lights, which is optics is a study of light. So I've really always been interested in light and optics. So with magnifying glasses, when I was a little kid, I thought it was like magic, a kind of magic. My water here. It isn't what you see through a lens or what you can do. It's just to fry an ant if the sun is shining. It's the lens itself. How can a piece of glass that's clear, there's nothing hidden inside the glass, you can see right through it. How can that do this amazing thing of magnifying? And the beauty for me of optics is everything is visible. It's not like electronics. You have no idea what's going on inside electronics. With mechanics, there could be gears that you're not seeing. But with optics, it's all there. You just look at the lens and the light comes in. Furthermore, nobody ever said, this damn camera, the light doesn't go through. Whereas for about 45 minutes here, These damn electronics, it's a completely different thing. But the optics is nice and clean that way. So I don't know if they still make these anymore, but when I was a kid, some flashlight bulbs, there were different kinds, and some of them had a little lens at the tip. And I would take a hammer and very carefully break it, and then take that little bitty glass lens and put it up to my eye, and it makes a powerful magnifier, about 50 power. And then later, I made water drop microscopes, which anybody could do. You need either a plastic sheet or aluminum foil, and you just make a little pinhole. You put a drop of water on it, and then you can pull it extremely close to your eye with some bright light. And that can be easily 100 power. And the very first glass microscope, which was just a single lens, one down here, invented about 350 years ago. That was so tiny, it's hard for me to imagine that they could get it close enough to their eye. But that was about 250 power. And just with that single thing, like a drop of water, you could actually see, amoeba, parameciums, all these things invisible to your eye. And since there's no mechanism, it's just a drop of water. It has to be real. Whereas if you had some gadget, well, maybe there's something inside the gadget that makes it look that way. With optics, it's never a problem. So this is, to me, amazing. Most catalogs from way back are all on the internet. Some crazy people have scanned, like this is the particular catalog from which I got my first microscope from a 1957 Sears Roebuck. The whole catalog is on probably the next issue, 1960, whatever. So I looked it up, and back then, 1957, when I was 14, I was looking at that very page and seeing these microscopes. So these early ones, they're called student microscopes, basically. But they're very useful and very simple. And one of them, I remember exactly the price back then. It sold for about on sale, it was $4.50. And I had two. One I took apart to get out the lenses, and the other one I used. One of the things I used these microscopes to look at was pond water, because I lived on a farm. We had a fairly large pond, and you just scoop up some water, let it settle for a while, and you can, with your naked eye, you can see a paramecium. It's a tiny little thing. Amoebas are more transparent. Maybe you can't spot those, but I just took a medicine dropper, take some water, you put it on a slide in the microscope. And this is not from me, this is from the internet. But it shows a amoeba slowly closing around a single paramecium that doesn't seem to realize what's about to happen. And I'm going to cut it off just before it starts to scream, but I don't have to because it's such a tiny thing. The scream is so high-pitched. You'd have to be a microscopic dog to hear it. So this is actually twice speed. And you can see that, through the microscope. And of course, the amoeba doesn't know anything. It probably, the being hit on the inside of that cavity sets off some automatic, response where it then goes like this. It's going to be dead in a minute. This is actually twice speed from the internet. So I grew up on a small farm in upstate New York. We had 5,000 chickens. By now I've forgotten most of their names. It was a very long time ago. And we had one cow, and I didn't drink pasteurized milk until I went to college. And I think there's aspects of growing up on a farm, stop there, that are very good for your long-term health. Could be that eating dirt, stuff like that was actually good for you. So the farm was very far from the next neighbor was a mile away, and there was no industry nearby, so the skies are very dark. Most people in their life have never seen a really dark sky. If you travel a lot, you might have seen one. But a really dark sky is like a nightly light show. It's amazing. And you start to see, that's where religion comes from. It's awe-inspiring. So I became interested in astronomy, and I got a kit, and I ground and polished a 6-inch mirror and made a telescope that looked something like this. And I did astronomy for a while, and then I realized what really interested me was not astronomy, it was the optics of the telescope. So that got me really stuck. Okay, so right after the invention of the telescope, there was another major invention on the lower right. Venetian blinds were invented. Just think about it. So back then, I was probably, maybe 15. I bought a star spectroscope. Back then, it cost $30. Now it costs about $300. Exact same thing. And you look through and you can see the solar spectrum, and I made drawings of the absorption lines and stuff like that. And these were pivotal books in my life. Amateur Telescope Making Books 1, 2, and 3, which came out of Scientific American Publishing Company or something. Somebody's jumping the gun up there. And this book on the lower right is amazing. It's a wonderful, wonderful read about the construction of the Mount Palomar telescope and all of the amazing stuff that went into that. Blank for it was cast in Corning, New York, and the actual making it into a mirror was done in California. So they had this special railroad car with a big metal can to put it upright like that. They figured out routes through under bridges and everything. The reason for the can, they figured for sure somebody will take a pot shot at this piece of glass. And when we got over to California, there's a lot of dents in it. I mean, wouldn't you like to be the guy that broke the biggest piece of glass in the world? But it's a very interesting read. Yeah, then in the Cornell bookstore, I bought these 2 books on how to do lens design, which is my field, lens design. And back then, this is before computers. There's a lot of drawings that look very complicated. How on earth am I going to learn this stuff? Because before the computers, you had to do all these calculations and stuff. And some of the stuff was hard to understand, but I figured if I stuck with it, I'd eventually understand. You know what it's like to read a book and slowly the print starts to fall off the page. But I've always been able to focus my attention very well. So I thought eventually I'd be able to understand math stuff, like this math joke. I think it's one of my favorite slides. 2 mathematicians are talking. They come up to the punchline, they both burst into laughter. So in high school, using 6 decimal place logarithm trig tables, just by hand and doing calculations with a pencil and paper. I traced a couple rays through a telescope doublet. It's a horrible thing. Once you've done it once, you never want to do it again. But just as I was getting up to be in college, computers started to come along, and nobody had to do that again. It transformed the whole field of having automated all these horrible calculations. And back then, there was no textbooks about how to do lens design. This is one of my favorite slides. Lassie, Timmy's drowning, and he says to Lassie, "Lassie, get help." So Lassie goes to some guy. So when I got to college, they just were starting to have these big mainframe computers with punch card input, and it was mainly for the faculty to use, but some of the students in the optics department were allowed to do some real simple stuff using a computer. So that was my first, back then, computers, and then ever since, I've been on a computer all the time. So in the 1950s, there were calculators that used electricity, but not to do computations. The electricity was to drive gears. Otherwise, you'd have like a hand crank or something. And the one on the left could do 10 decimal place calculations. You would crank and crank and crank away, and you'd come up with something. A great labor saver. But very shortly afterwards, we started to get, big computers and eventually PCs. And the speed of the PC is like millions of times faster than even the one on the left, and probably 1 billion times faster than using, a pencil. So it transformed the field. So these early programs were horrible. They were like a whole new language, like learning North Korean or something.
Why didn't we do it?
So every time I changed my job, there'd be an in-house program that had been written for that company. You had to learn a whole new language. And during your career, you might have to do this, 4 or 5 times. Horrible. Now, nobody has to do that anymore. And PerkinElmer here in Wilton was one of the ones I used. Okay, next. So my main belief is that the brain was and will always be the best source of new things in optics, new inventions. One thing that's wonderful about the brain, it's free, good for 2 shifts a day, or in some cases 3 shifts a day, user-friendly language. It's portable, time-sharing capacity. Brain has color monitor, and there's no ads. So although computers revolutionize all these computations and stuff, creative thinking still requires the designer. So what I found the best way, not just in optics, in anything in life, basically. If you want to be more creative, you want to solve problems, the best thing you can do is to identify assumptions you've made. It's a 2-step thing. Identify your assumptions and then challenge them. That's the root to creativity. So when I was a kid, I bought an AM radio and I made an assumption. What was the assumption? I thought maybe we'd have to buy 2 radios, AM and PM. Well, that's a joke. But that's an example. You make an assumption that seems reasonable, AM radio, what's the other one? PM. So that kind of thinking, I think, is key to creativity. So then I started work. My first job was in Boston for a small company that only did top secret military programs as part of the Cold War. And it's easy, if you've never been there, the Cold War was a very scary time. We thought we'd all get blown up or something. This, on the left, it's a cartoon from Mad Magazine. Some of the early space programs, instead of the rocket going up, the other thing goes up there. Anyways, the first project was at this small company in 1966. It was a new idea, a top secret idea for a way to detect the presence of Russian submarines. And over the years, it's slowly been declassified. And I'll show you how it works. But before I get to that, on the left you see a submarine and you got this periscope coming up. And when it breaks the surface of the water, you can get a trail in the back of that. You see on the upper left, it makes a little wake in the water. If it's moving slowly, it's hardly anything. But even if it's moving fast, it's a tiny little thing. And you can't see the submarine because it's underwater. But if you were looking at a slant off of an airplane, you might see that little line and say, what's that coming from? So it used to be, before this top secret thing came along, where the binoculars are just staring out at from a carrier deck, you would look for like a glint of sunlight off of the window of the front of the periscope. And that might, but what's the chances of seeing that? And the waves give glints all the time. So it was very difficult to spot visually the presence of a periscope in the distance. And of course, the submarine didn't want to be seen, so they're not going to surface if they can help it. So from an airplane, even a thin little line in the water can stand up. But even so, it's hard to see. So what was needed was a new, very clever, highly sensitive way to spot a periscope that might be like 2 miles away, just sticking out of the water, little things sticking up. How could you do that? Back then, in 1966, when I worked on it, it had a classified code name, and they call it optical augmentation. And it's still called that today. You can look it up on the internet. The way it works, it's very simple, it's very clever. I had nothing to do with it, but when I found out about it, I thought, boy, this is amazing. We all know what red eye looks like from, not just photography, but at night you go out and, or a deer, you drive along at night, you see the deer way far away, these lights. The reason you're seeing that is light comes into the eye and is focused on the retina. That's how you get images. It turned out the retina is partially reflective. And so some of the light hits the retina, bounces back, and goes exactly back the way it came, leaves the eye, and a parallel beam goes long distances. So if you can intercept that, you'll see red eye. That's what you're seeing with red eye. So the way this top secret thing worked was the deck of a aircraft carrier or a battleship, whatever, would have a laser on it, on a turret that's scanning the horizon continuously, going like this. And if the beam hits the periscope window, the light goes down the tube to the eyepiece, and if the commander is looking through the periscope, it goes into his eye, hits his retina, goes all the way back out to the thing, maybe 2 miles away, and is caught. And you'll see red eye, very bright compared to normal. And it turns out the wavelength of the laser was near infrared. And the purpose of that was so that anybody looking through the periscope would not see a bright light in the distance, which would tell them he's being looked at. It'd be visible if it's near infrared. And it was low power, so nobody got hurt, blinded or anything. So it turns out the collection area of the periscope optics is much larger than that of our eye. So the amount of energy that's going into the periscope was down to is much more than a deer or a cat or anything. The signal was way, way, way brighter. And because of that, you could spot a periscope, miles away. But in addition, you could point a laser at a satellite 100 miles up or something. The satellite has cameras looking down. So the laser beam goes into the camera, hits the film or detector, comes back out all the way back down to where it's sent from. You can spot satellites that are invisible to us just by this red eye effect. And they can time them. With a pulse laser, they can figure out how long did it take to make the trip. They now know how high the satellite is, all kinds of amazing stuff. So one of the things that was used later after everything's declassified, what if you're a movie star? You're trying to have a little privacy. You go to some beach on the Riviera, and you think there's nobody around for miles, so take all my clothes off. And the paparazzi are hiding behind a sand dune with cameras. So with a device much smaller and simpler than this military one, you could just look around through this thing to see them in, and you'll spot if there's some hidden camera. Or maybe you want to be photographed, I don't know. So these days, it's all declassified, and even with a handheld device like this, before you check into your hotel room or inside your room, those little tiny pinhole cameras, about the size of a pinhole, can be on the base of a lamp, they can be, you'll never spot them yourself. But this shines a light, and anything that's a hidden camera, you suddenly see a bright spot, a bright red spot. So if you're a person who travels a lot, what's it cost, like $100? There's probably cheaper ones. And it's a way to find hidden cameras looking at you. That's something that disturbs you. Okay, next. Okay, this is related, but a little bit different. The crazy thing is, in military systems, the incredibly expensive ones that we spend all of our military budget on can usually be defeated at a cost less than 1%. The ways to defeat systems are always much cheaper than the ways to build it. I'll give you an example in a minute. And furthermore, there's so much money spent like on a missile defense system. I worked on these things. I can guarantee you there's no missile defense system that works. In Israel, they have a rocket defense system, but the rocket's going a few hundred miles an hour. A missile's coming in thousands of miles. There's no defense against it. Probably never will be. But here's an example. Here's a super cheap, very, very cheap way to screw up a $3 million Tomahawk cruiser. The Navy spent a fortune to make this monster laser that's just on the deck of the aircraft carrier. Super high power. The idea is if a Tomahawk missile's coming in towards the ship, you point the laser and you zap it and you blow it up. It's so expensive, it's incredible. If you're making a Tomahawk missile to come in, all you have to do is basically wrap it in aluminum foil or something, paint it in aluminum paint, make it a mirror surface on the outside. Now, all that energy mostly gets reflected away. It won't be strong enough to damage the thing. What does that cost compared to gazillion dollars for that? And it's all like that. Oh, so then we move on to my middle years. Next, and since 1980, I've worked at home. And here, Death is working from home, delete. And that's be 1980, so it's been a long time that I've been home. So. One project I worked on was for Salvador Dali, a crazy but very cleverly crazy person. He made a lot of money by being crazy. He once said, "I don't do drugs, I am drugs." And he had anything that would get high publicity. That's what he would do, like this lobster telephone. Very interesting design. Very well known for extremely unusual images. So one thing he'd always been interested in is illusions. And at first glance, these look like something that's not what they are. If you look at this close up, you'll see here's a guy that's sitting on a rock. Here's this woman's. Different parts of the image are made. Like here, there's a guy here playing the guitar. I don't know if you can see that. And with him, this is a very good one. It's a man with the, with his hat. Anyway, so these kind of things are so unusual. Dali was good at creating them. And there's another one on the left. It looks like a woman from a distance, and close up it's two soldiers on a horse, etc. He figured out how to make stereo paintings. And by that I mean he'd make a painting of what your right eye would see, almost exactly the same painting, but a little bit different, of the left eye. And so these two paintings, and they're a stereo pair. So if you could somehow look at them and overlap them, you'd see 3D. He hired some mathematicians to help him with the calculations. Well, anyway, Salvador Dali came once a year, would come to New York City and stay at the St. Pierre Hotel. And I went in to meet him to do this project of a new kind of stereo viewer. And I spent about an hour alone with him in his hotel room. And in college, I'd read his autobiography. So this is many years later. So I said, you've met so many famous people. You ought to write another updated autobiography. And although he was an old man, he was very sharp, very sharp. So it was an interesting project, but I don't know if we'll ever get to it. So here's an example. The right and left eye's views are slightly different. There's 8 different depth levels, intentionally. And if you do actually get the stereo effect with this viewer in design, you see all that depth. That was the whole point of it. So this is what he looked like when I met him. And as he was tack sharp mentally, a little bit feeble otherwise. So here's an example of creativity and questioning assumptions. On the top, without showing how you would do it, I've got 2 paintings at the top of the frame, a right and left painting. And then down here, I've got a right and left eye. So the obvious thing is the right eye will look at the right painting, the left eye will look at the left. That's obvious. It's so simple. How could it be anything simpler? Well, it's not simpler, but there's an alternate down there. There's a different system with the right eye looks at and they cross over. Now you have to make and the paintings be different. But it's an alternate solution. And it turned out that one of these was better than the other. If you get the things crossed and you forget to switch the paintings, you get that kind of bug eye. While we're waiting, I had a very bad cold about a month ago. I went to the doctor. He says, "What are you taking for that cough?" And I said, "Make me an offer." So the final thing was a box that you would reach in, pick up this viewer. His face was supposedly being shown, and then you would look through, and his face would be looking at you, and you'd be looking through his eyes. Very gimmicky thing. Anyway, so they made 2,000 pairs of this. Each pair would go with one of my viewers, and the whole thing sold for $5,000 for that. And they made 2,000, so it's like a $10 million project. My first patent was for an unusual kind of telescope to be very cheap to make. And I got a call once from Italy, people I never heard of before, and they had seen the patent, and they said, "We want to make your telescope." I said, "Fine, go ahead." About 20 years later, I found out it had arrived at Saturn. They made it, they didn't tell me about it. And it went to Saturn, went around a bunch of times. Eventually, they deliberately crashed it in so they could film on the way down. What's the atmosphere like? Then they launched another one that went to a comet and landed on the comet. Another one that went to the planetoid, it was on the side of the Cassini spacecraft. And when they came up to this planetoid series, very strange lights. I don't believe the explanation they gave. They claim it's reflections off a salt lake, but I mean, I'm not saying there's aliens, but it's just, they haven't figured out what those lights are from. Next. Okay, so then we get to computers, which were the end of human evolution, and stop Homer Simpson dead in his tracks. And that brings in computer chips. It's hard to conceive how small a micron is. This is a picture of an ant holding in its jaws a chip that's 1 millimeter on a side. Well, 1 millimeter is 1,000 microns. So 1 micron would be 1,000th the width of that itty bitty thing. These days, a micron is enormous compared to the detail on computer chips, like 1,000 times smaller than that. Inconceivable. In fact, DNA, bacteria, all those things are huge compared to what today's computer chips have the details on them. So these chips are made using what amounts to be a giant camera lens. It's like a Xerox machine. So this huge lens, and I designed these for years, would look something like this. Whole bunch of lenses. The biggest ones would be like, a foot in diameter. The glass is not glass, it's silica, and it's pure to a few atoms. And they make the surfaces accurate to a few atoms. How's that possible? How can you even measure it? But they don't get the resolution they need for today's state-of-the-art chips unless they can make these surfaces accurate to a few atoms. It's just craziness. And that very complicated lens, that goes into the surroundings of electronics and mechanics and stuff. That's this vertical blue thing. That's the lens. And that's made the lens is made by Zeiss, and the machine is made by ASML, which is in the news, constantly in the news. So each one of my lenses goes into one of these things, and they sell for about 20 million a piece. And Zeiss has made thousands of them. So we're talking big bucks. Then the machine it goes into is another, gazillion dollars. So these things are just amazing how much they cost. But in 2004, 22 years ago, I invented a radically new type of system, which is shown here, which is now used to make all the computer chips in the world. Every year, a trillion, not a billion, a trillion chips are made every year now around the world. And every one of them is made using my system. And the amount of money I got for that, zero. Because I have a contract, everything I do, they own. That's a common type of thing. And who knew that it would be worth a lot? And with today's state-of-the-art chip making stuff, on a single red blood cell, you could probably write a book or something. So now the latest thing is going to X-rays instead of light, and those are much more expensive. And the state-of-the-art now that's made by Zeiss, that goes into the ASML machine, they run about $350, $400 million each. And they can't keep up with the demand. If you got spare change in your pocket, invest it in ASML. They have 100% monopoly. Nobody can touch them. They could charge anything. And all the big tech companies are desperate to get hold of this equipment. And again, the surfaces of these optical systems are made to, like in this case, 4 times the diameter of the hydrogen atom. You can't believe what's happening. And this is my last slide. So I used to think I would work until I died, and then for a few years after I died, I'd be working half-time. But I decided to retire. 2 years ago, I decided to retire. And I love the cartoon on the right. Death comes to take her husband, and as he's leaving, she says, "Relax, honey, change is good." So that's the talk.
If you like this video, you might like one of our videos above or one of the other videos or podcasts at hffcct.org. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button above. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking humanistically.